Okay, we are live on YouTube, so we're ready to go.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our first Burlingame Police Department Town Hall and Community Listening Session. Today is Thursday, July 23rd, 2020, and we're really delighted that you joined us. And I think we all recognize this is the beginning of a very important dialogue between the community, our police department, and our city leadership. It is a very important event and we're glad you're with us. It's certainly important to you because you've taken the time out of your busy calendar to join us, whether you're joining us live this evening or watching the recording later. It's certainly important to the police department. It's an opportunity for our police leadership and our department to hear and understand where the community is coming from and also share some important facts and information as well. I think and I hope what you'll also take away tonight is you'll really see as you get to know Chief Matucci during this process is how our police department and Chief Matucci is really a willing and eager partner on this journey and has been from the very beginning. This is a department that values continuous improvement, is here to serve everyone and make sure that everyone feels safe, particularly at this moment in time, people of color. Recognizing that and a willingness to really make any changes that are necessary. It's also very important to the City Council. As the elected policymakers for the city, we're here to listen and learn tonight from all of you so we can make sure that our police policies reflect the values of our community. So a little context, we're here tonight because, as we all know, the tragic events that led to George Floyd's death and so many others. President Barack Obama, former President Obama, challenged all mayors and city council members across the country to consider reevaluating their use of force policies, engaging their community, and then reporting back on making changes that need to happen. So on June 15th, our city council had this discussion, this policy opportunity on our agenda. We all unanimously agreed to go forth and take the mayor and council members' pledge. And we did something very unique. Typically, when we pass resolutions that are matters of policy, the mayor signs off. This was different. This was so important to every member of our city council that all 5 of us signed that document. So we are all here tonight as well. I want to just briefly introduce and thank Vice Mayor O'Brien Keegren for being here. Also council members Ricardo Ortiz, Michael Brownrigg, and Donna Colson. We are all here tonight. In just a few, we're going to be listening and learning tonight. In just a few moments, our faces are going to disappear from this panel, and you will see us again at the end for some closing remarks. But we've created this format tonight so that really we maximize the opportunity for members of the public to have the opportunity to ask questions and interact with our members of our senior staff leadership, which includes our city manager, Lisa Goldman, and our chief of police, Mike Matucci. So we thank you all for being here. I just wanted to kind of set that basic background so we're all on the same page as we move forward to a very important discussion tonight. Thank you for joining us. And I'll turn it over to City Manager Lisa Goldman now.
Muted myself. Thank you, Mayor Beach. It's a pleasure to have you all here, and we appreciate. In fact, we got lots of comments and questions in advance, and then we'll have an opportunity while the meeting is going on after we do a really brief presentation. So Megan, if you wouldn't mind switching to the next slide. There we go. So this is the mayor's and council members' pledge, the Obama pledge that Mayor Beach mentioned. And as she noted, we had all 5 of our council members really felt committed to this. And so usually when we do a resolution and the council adopts it, just the mayor signs. But in this case, we had all 5 of our folks sign it. And there is a link down on the bottom left for anybody who wants to review it themselves. But it commits us to review our police use of force policies, to engage the community, which is what we're just starting today. This is step 1. It's not the only step. We will continue after tonight, but this is our beginning. And then report the findings of our review back to the community, seek feedback, and then reform our use of force policies as needed. And so that's what we started with. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is just a brief outline of what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to ask the chief to give an overview of the police department and who we are and what kinds of divisions we have and what our staffing level looks like. We are really different from a lot of the departments that you see in the news. Usually you'll hear or see information about the really large departments, and that's where a lot of the difficult conversations are going on. We are a small department. We actually have 40 sworn officers, which is pretty small. And what that does is it allows us to have really good eyes and ears on what's going on in the department and how the department is interacting out in the community. And so we'll have Chief Matucci talk about that and talk about the use of force policy. And that'll be it for presentation. And then we're gonna, and then the 8 Can't Wait is a campaign that's a lot of folks learned about right around when all the Black Lives Matters protests started after the tragic killing of George Floyd. 8 Can't Wait was started by DeRay McKesson and others, and we actually have a slide on that, so we'll get to that in just a minute. Then we'll go into our Engage and Listen. We have, probably 30 or more questions that were submitted in advance. If you submitted more than one question, we're not going to do all your questions in a row. We're actually going to split them up so we have an opportunity to get to more people's questions. And then we will circle back in and hit your second question, your third question, depending on how far we get. And we're also going to be taking questions live. So people will be able to send a chat message to Clerk Hassel-Shearer, our city clerk, and then she'll be reading them. And she'll also be reading the pre-submitted questions. So this will be our test of Megan and her reading skills, which is not easy when you have a nice big audience. So let's go through the pre-submitted questions, our live public comment and question period. The chief and I will try to answer as many as we can. We also have our city attorney, Kathleen Kane, on tonight in case we need her to help us out with any answers. And then whatever we don't get to, we will try. There's some things we just don't have answers to, and some we won't have time to get to tonight. And so we will do our best to answer those questions and put out something on our website. And whatever we put out, we'll send out via the electronic newsletter. Hopefully you're all signed up for that. It comes out every Thursday. And then we'll also put it out on other social media like Nextdoor. So you should be able to find our answers. And then we'll identify some topics of interest for future sessions. And at that point, we'll probably engage the services of Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center, PCRC, to help us, doing sort of more smaller breakout type groups on other issues in the future. That won't be for tonight. We're just going to be capturing information tonight. So with that, if we could move on to the next slide. And I'm going to ask the chief to talk about his organization. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining in tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Mike Matucci. I'm the chief of police of Burlingame. I've been here my entire law enforcement career for 29 years. I was hired right out of college. And I'm also a resident of Burlingame. I've lived here for a little over 10 years in the Lion Hogue area. So I don't want to take up too much time tonight as this is really about the community speaking, and I want to allow as much time as possible for comments and any questions. But I would like to give a brief overview of some of the department practices and summarize our use of force policy in case some of you didn't get a chance to read it or look it over before tonight. As the city manager mentioned, we are really fortunate to have a very small department of 40 officers. That's good for two reasons. One, oversight is much easier in a smaller department with 40 officers than it is in a larger department with, hundreds of officers, maybe even thousands of officers. And also, secondly, we can be, a lot more selective with our hiring. So in regards to oversight, we have very small patrol teams supervised by a sergeant. So our span of control is very small. Sergeants are constantly monitoring calls for service and stops and arrests and use of force incidents in the field. In addition, our operations lieutenant reviews the call logs daily, looking for any type of calls or arrests or anything that he may want to look into further. And our investigations lieutenant also reads every report our officers write for quality control, and as well as looking to see if we're doing everything we need to do as far as investigation and follow up on those reports. And then also my captain and myself, we're always in there looking at the daily call logs and reports for anything that may catch our eyes and anything we want to look at further. All use of force incidents in Burlingame are reviewed, however slight, and that always includes a review of the body-worn camera footage. And with that being said, all of our officers are equipped with body-worn cameras, and they're required to activate them on all calls and all citizen contacts. And they're saved and reviewed as needed. So to sum that up, the bottom line is our officers are really being watched out there in the field. As far as hiring, I mentioned we can be a little more selective with our hiring. Not to say that bigger agencies aren't, but at Burlingame, when we average hiring 1 or 2 officers a year, as opposed to some of these larger agencies that have to hire dozens and dozens, we can be, a little more selective. And I just realized in preparing for this meeting tonight, I've been a captain or the chief at Burlingame since 2004. And so when I looked at who we've hired since then, I realized that I've been directly involved in the hiring of 31 out of the 40 officers that we have here at this time. And when I say involved, I mean directly involved. I've been the one who interviewed them. I've recommended them and signed off on them to former chiefs. And I've overseen their entire background and hiring process. So I know them. I know them well. I can't use the excuse that some other chiefs could use that I inherited these officers. I own these picks. They're my responsibility, and I stand behind them. But they're a good group of officers whose hearts are in the right place. We also, in hiring, we like to look for diversity amongst our officers, not just by race or by nationality or by gender, but also in background. I don't just look for ex-military, ex-security guards, or criminal justice majors. If you look at the police department, we have officers with a wide variety of experience. We have officers that used to be teachers. We have officers that used to be auto mechanics. We have officers that came from the tech sector. So we have officers that played football in high school, and we have officers that did drama in high school. So we run the gamut with our backgrounds on our officers. Unfortunately, one of the issues we face in Burlingame is that we don't tend to attract a diverse group of applicants. And so we're always looking for ways to attract a more diverse candidate pool. And I would be welcome to any ideas anybody might have tonight or in the future if they want to contact me for ways that we could attract a more diverse group of applicants. Also, in regards to hiring, there's a police reform bill at the federal level called Justice in Policing of 2020. And this is the bill that requires a national police registry to keep track of officers who have been in trouble and terminated in the past. And if you ask me, I would completely support that bill because really it wouldn't affect BPD because we don't hire problem officers here and we don't keep problem officers here. So, with that being said, we are here tonight to talk about our use of force policy. So I would like to summarize that if I could before we get started. And that's our flyer right there. That was our flyer. That's our flyer, most recent hiring campaign. So if anybody would like some of those flyers to post, or please get a hold of me, and I can get you those flyers to post up if need be. Okay, so as far as the use of force, so the reason for the use of force policy basically is the policy provides guidelines on the reasonable use of force. And one of the first lines in our use of force policy is the department recognizes and respects the value of all human life and dignity without prejudice towards anyone. And that's been in our use of force policy well before the George Floyd incident. So the basic rule of use of force is that officers shall use only that amount of force that reasonably appears necessary given the facts and totality of the circumstances known to or perceived by the officer at the time of the event. And so to go a little more further, any peace officer may use objectively reasonable force to effect an arrest, to prevent escape, or to overcome resistance. That policy right there kind of opens up to a lot of debate because people always seem to ask the question, well, is that arrest worth it? Is the prevention of that escape worth it? Is the resistance that the subject is causing, is it worth it? So also written in our policy are factors to consider. Which is the severity of the crime, the mental state of the suspect, weapons, other options, the danger to the public, whether we can ID the person to arrest later. So those are things that are in the policy that cover, when it's reasonable to use force to effect an arrest, prevent an escape, or overcome resistance. As far as deadly force, the basic rule is basically an officer may use deadly force to protect him or herself or others from what he or she reasonably believes is an imminent threat or of death or serious bodily injury to the officer or another person. So that's it. That's the only time an officer is justified to use deadly force is if there's an imminent threat to themselves or another person of death or serious bodily injury. We also have policy in effect about about reporting other officers if they use excessive force, and it reads, any officer present and observing another officer using force that is clearly beyond that which is objectively reasonable under the circumstances shall, when in a position to do so, intercede to prevent the use of unreasonable force. We also have in there a section about de-escalation. It says officers shall be trained in alternatives to deadly force and de-escalation techniques, and shall utilize de-escalation techniques, crisis intervention tactics, and other alternatives to force when feasible. That we just added into our policy after the George Floyd incident. We're all trained, all of our officers are trained in de-escalation, and we practice it routinely in the field. It just was never articulated in the policy. So that was something we added in the policy since the George Floyd incident. We also have in there the use of carotid control holds, choke holds, and strangleholds is prohibited. That was another policy we added after the George Floyd incident. We always banned choke holds or strangleholds, but we had in our policy that we could use carotid controls, and we took that out after the George Floyd incident. We also talk about medical assistance in our policy. Medical assistance shall be obtained for any person who exhibits signs of physical distress, who has sustained visible injury, expresses a complaint of injury or continuing pain, or who has been rendered unconscious. So in our policy, we are required to get people medical assistance when needed. And then, of course, very important, any use of force by a member of this department shall be documented and reviewed promptly. So that's kind of the summary of our use of force policy. I would like to touch quickly on the 8 Can't Wait campaign, because I've received, myself and City Hall have received a lot of emails since the George Floyd incident about 8 Can't Wait. So 8 Can't Wait is a national campaign started by the activist group Campaign Zero, which offers a set of 8 recommendations for use of force policy changes that they claim can immediately decrease police violence. So our policy addresses in some fashion 7 out of the 8. And you can see at the slide there, 7 out of the 8. The one it doesn't is the requiring a use of force continuum. We don't have that in there, and we don't plan on putting that in there. And the reason is it's the opinion of the Burlingame Police Department, and actually police departments in general, that it's an outdated model that has proven impractical and even dangerous. But I can touch on any of these 8 Can't Wait later in the presentation. If anybody has questions or wants me to expand on any of those 8 topics, I can certainly do that. But at this point in time, I'm done. With,
Chief, if I could just add to that, the use of force policy already requires the sort of de-escalation measures, which would be what takes the place of that use of force continuum. So it's not that we don't have the principle in our policies, it's that we call it something different.
Right. So at this point, I'm done with my presentation. I'm here to listen to the public and answer any questions I can.
Great, thank you, Chief. And for those who joined us a little bit late, I wanted to just announce that all of our council members are on this meeting tonight. You are just not seeing their faces in these smiley boxes, but you will see them at the end. We are using a little bit of a different format of Zoom from what we use during our regular council meetings. This is Zoom webinar, and so we're just having the folks who are speaking visible on camera. And then at the very end, we are going to hear from all 5 of our council members. They're going to give some wrap-up comments. So with that, I'm going to put Megan on the spot. If you could give us the first question, and you can either do written ones we've received in advance, or if you have any chat questions, it's up to you how you want to handle those. But we are going to alternate back and forth between live questions and the ones that came in ahead of time.
Yes, so I just like, once again, for everyone, if you do have a question that you haven't emailed in to public comment at burlingame.org, you can either Zoom chat me your question, or I can see I already have one hand raised that would like to ask a question or has a comment. And also, just as a heads up, at the end of this webinar, we've created a small survey just asking if you'd like to be informed about future meetings of this nature, to just give us some information and feedback. So please fill that out, as you'll only help us. So I think I'll start with the person that has their hand up. So Laura, I'm going to allow you to talk. And Lisa, are we giving everyone 2 minutes?
Let's go 2 minutes, because we did have quite a number of written questions that came in, and so we want to try to get through as many of those as we can. So it looks like Laura Hines.
Yeah. Laura.
Thank you for presenting this forum, and thank you to Chief Medici for your brief but concise presentation. I think that most of us really are concerned not so much with the Burlingame Police Department, but policing in general, and would like a more open conversation about how we can reroute some of the calls that go into 911, maybe to do with our youth, maybe to do with mental health crises, and reroute them away from the police department. There's Belmont right now is talking about doing a task force to address that. And there's a great program, which you probably have heard of in Eugene, Oregon, that has taken 20% of their police calls and rerouted them to an EMT and a person that is specially trained with crisis intervention, mediation, conflict resolution, and sometimes 24/7, they even go with the police officers. I have a personal story myself, but I won't share it because I don't have enough minutes. But I'm just hoping that City Council is open to those kind of discussions and to, just try to prevent a safer future for us all, especially during this crisis, which I'll tell you, a lot of parents are at home and working from home. It's frustrating. It's frustrating for a lot of people. And this may be a time when we could really use those kind of agencies in the field. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you for your comments. We are familiar with the Eugene Cahoots program that you referenced. Somebody emailed that to us a few weeks ago, and so we have looked into that, and we appreciate your comments, and we'll put them into the hopper as we continue this process. Next question, Megan.
Sure. I'm going to ask a question that came in from email. What are BPD's responsibilities for mutual aid to neighboring cities that defund their police when we are fully funding ours? Have we notified those city councils of the potential for reduced aid? Who would like to take that?
That's for the
I can
chief.
answer that question. So I think first we need to realize that defund does not mean disband. It means redirecting funds to other community programs or government agencies. And I don't know of any of our neighboring cities considering either option at this time. If they were, Burlingame Police Department would not be responsible for providing police services without some type of prior contract being negotiated. So they couldn't just rely on mutual aid. And mutual aid is something different that agencies have been providing to each other for decades. When a city has a major event that taxes their resources, other agencies will provide assistance. Examples would be, the YouTube shooting in San Bruno or the recent protests in other cities. But we would not just be giving officers. If neighboring city, disbanded their police department, we would not be Burlingame's responsibility to handle their calls unless we were contracted for police services.
Great.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is, do Burlingame police officers have impunity?
So I can answer that one as well. So Burlingame officers do not have impunity. Impunity means that we can be held criminally responsible for our actions. So we can be held criminally responsible for our actions on or off duty. We do have, however, qualified immunity. And I'm not sure if that's what the person meant, but that does protect officers from being sued for monetary damages, so long as their conduct doesn't clearly violate someone's constitutional rights. And arguments for having qualified immunity, there's several. One is that the claims are frequently made against the innocent as well as the guilty. The expense of litigation, staff time and attention diverted from more pressing public issues. It may deter people from becoming an officer or remaining an officer. And also the threat of lawsuits could stop officers from engaging in lawful police business.
Okay, so our next question comes in via chat, and it says, how are officers mentored and performances reviewed? Ongoing or daily, weekly, monthly, or annually? If you saw a need, would you discharge an officer if necessary?
So yes, so they're first all the officers go through thorough background checks, and they go into the academy. They're in the academy for 6 months where they're watched daily and they have daily reports. When they get out of the police academy, they start what we call a field training program, and they're with different officers for several weeks at a time, in the car with them. It would be called field training, and they're basically they're evaluated after each call, but at the end of each day, they're being evaluated. And at the end of each phase of training, they're reevaluated. And that is about a 15-week process. And if they get past their field training, they're on an 18-month probation where they are evaluated again. They're daily by their sergeants, just like I mentioned earlier. There's sergeants in the field that are monitoring our officers daily. But technically, when you're on probation, a new officer, you get evaluated every biweekly, and those evaluations again go through the chain of command, and everybody gets to read them. And yes, we have let officers go during the academy. We've let officers go during field training, and we've let officers go during probation. Absolutely, we have.
Okay. Our next question is coming live, and it's from the Hinkle family. I'm gonna unmute you. You are trying to unmute you.
Anne or David, you're gonna maybe need to unmute yourself. There we go. We're ready for you.
Okay, I'm gonna mute you again, and we'll come back to you. So let's go on to, we have another hand raised from Arn. So I will allow you to talk if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief, for holding this town hall. Much appreciated, and City Council as well. I think it's very important, and I admire the fact that people want to talk about the use of force and how police conduct their jobs. But I think a bigger question, and I'd like to follow up on what Laura touched on just a little earlier, a minute ago. The bigger question is, where do we need the use of force? Where do we need armed officers and the threat of arrest? And do we need that for handing out a traffic violation? Do we need that for patrolling our neighborhoods? Or do we need that for making a call on a noise complaint? Certainly those issues need to be addressed, but do we need an armed officer to handle those things? And the reason I'm asking that question is because an armed officer is an oppressive presence. And I think that what's happened across the country of late is that we've seen how that in and of itself can escalate a situation. It's hard to document that, but I mean, the tension is very real there. And certainly any of these people, a traffic monitor, a neighborhood watch group, a social worker, an administrator in a school, they can just as easily call on the police when danger arises or when they observe an offense that's outside of the domain of simply them being to handle it with their own expertise. And as Laura alluded to earlier as well, and what we're seeing a lot around the conversation, a lot around now, is that there are people who have dedicated their lives to a lot of the difficulties, to studying the right ways to go about dealing with the difficulties that people have when they're suffering from substance abuse or when they're suffering from mental illness. That's not a trivial thing to deal with. So anyways, that's what I'd like to, that was my comment.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask a couple of the pre-questions that came in. So first we had another comment that came in. I'm sure Burlingame will always make our police feel we have their backs, as I know they have ours. I can't imagine how the officers in some of the other jurisdictions must feel, knowing that they are not appreciated, to say the least. I have always been most grateful for their kindness and quick response when needed. Our police should not be defunded if that is even being considered. And they wanted to be with us, but they had surgery. So they are out.
So we wish that person well.
Yes. So our next question is, what is the status of Neighborhood Watch? Does BPD find value in investing time and effort in this program?
I can answer that. I just want to go back up and Arn, I want to thank you for that, for your comment, and I respect your opinion on that, and I appreciate that. As far as the Neighborhood Watch, so I think it's a valuable program, and I would encourage any neighborhood in Burlingame to start one. I don't believe we have any at this time. The police department doesn't facilitate the creation of neighborhood watch groups, but we fully support any neighborhood that starts one. We'll attend meetings, we'll go to events, we'll give presentations, we'll provide them with crime stats. And anybody who's interested in starting a neighborhood watch in Burlingame, they can get more information on that on their website, National Neighborhood Watch, and you can register at nnw.org. And again, the police department will be happy to assist you with your meetings and with anything you may need.
So normally this would be a great time for us to give out information during National Night Out, which in a normal year is the first Tuesday in August. And neighbors come out at night and they throw block parties and have goodies or barbecues or just games for the kids or whatever it happens to be. And members of Central County Fire go around and visit the different parties, and members of the police go around and visit the different parties. And it's just a way for everyone to sort of get to know their neighbors and, be outside and figure out how do we all take care of each other. That is a perfect opportunity for Neighborhood Watch to get organized. Unfortunately, this is not the year for that. We just can't do it. But, hopefully we'll be able to come back better than ever next year, the first Tuesday in August, and do a really robust National Night Out. And by then, maybe we will have some neighborhood watch groups that have formed. I think that question came in from Holly Daly, who is the head of Burlingame Neighborhood Network. So thank you, Holly, for that question. And it may be that BNN wants to help organize. You guys are already so good at organizing your neighbors. And so it could be sort of an offshoot. I know that you're busy with a million other things, but if there's a way that BNN can help kind of jumpstart those conversations or expand your mission at all, if that makes sense for you, I think that would be great. And as the chief said, we're here to partner with you, but really it has to hopefully come from the neighbors starting that up. But I will say that our folks will go out and they'll talk to, even if you don't have a formal neighborhood watch program, they do go out and they hold neighborhood meetings. And so if there's a crime situation in a neighborhood, if people are feeling nervous about something, if they just want to get their neighbors together, again, not now, nobody's allowed to get together, but in the future, if you want to get together with your neighbors and have an officer come talk about, how do we stay safe? What do we need to do? If we're going out of town and, keep our home safe or whatever it happens to be, they will go out and they'll visit and talk to folks and, just kind of explain what's going on. And so that is available. Again, not now, but someday again, it will be available when we're all allowed to be in the same room with each other.
Okay, our next question comes via chat and it says, I wholeheartedly agree with Laura Hines' comments. I appreciate the 8 can't wait and efforts to regulate use of force. However, I think we should take a harder look at whether we need to arm all police officers. Can we explore a policing model in Burlingame where officers responding to routine calls or traffic stops do not have guns?
I'll just start an answer with that, and the chief may have some thoughts. I think that's something that we need to take under advisement and look into. I know that the city of Berkeley is starting an experiment now where they are trying to create a Department of Transportation, and they'll have unarmed folks doing traffic stops. I do have some serious reservations about that. Many of the traffic stops are fine and not dangerous and very routine, and some aren't. And the ones that aren't give me a lot of concern as an employer who has to keep my people safe and keep the community safe. So I'd be curious to see how that works out in Berkeley and whether that's something that proves successful or not. They're a much larger department. It kind of makes sense for them to give it a whirl, but we can certainly do some exploring of that concept on our own. I don't want to be first doing that. And maybe Chief, you have some other things, or I see Kathleen unmuted herself. You might have something to add. Kathleen's our risk manager, so she's probably going to go along those lines.
Yeah, so well, I also just wanted to point out that we're already doing something similar in a lot of cases as it is. So for example, when there's a child welfare issue, our officers respond with the social worker, and it's a team effort. And there are team efforts around issues regarding homelessness outreach, where it's often not just our officers, but it's members of the county crisis team who go out. So these partnerships already exist on a lot of issues, and I think that our department is quick to try to leverage the expertise of people with special training in these areas, as well as I know that the chief and some of his predecessors have gone out and tried to get extra training for our officers on sort of mental health intervention issues and that kind of thing in order to be better prepared to deal with a wider range of issues. I think that if you ask the average police officer, they would, relish having more support from the county and elsewhere for some of these social service type oriented calls. And so it's something that we are always looking to figure out how to build out those partnerships. A lot of it is resource constrained, but that's not something that has to be the case forever. And so I think it is something that the department and the city and the county partners would be looking at in the future.
Chief?
Yeah, I just want to add, people talk about routine calls, and there's no such thing as a routine call. Officers get injured and killed all the time during routine calls. We train our officers to think of no call as routine, to not be complacent. That's when officers get hurt and injured, is when they get complacent. And as far as traffic stops, those are that's one of the most dangerous things an officer can do. Many officers get injured and killed during traffic stops. So to call any call for service routine, if I heard an officer of mine saying it's just a routine call, he'd be in my office and I'd be saying it's not routine. You need to, you can't think like that. You're going to get hurt. So although, I do agree that, I think that we can use community services more and assist us in some of our other calls with the homeless. And we do that now with homeless and, with mental health. But to unarm officers and to call calls routine and to downplay the risks with traffic stops, I think is not a good idea.
Mike, can you talk a little bit about your work with the homeless outreach teams, and then I can't remember the exact name of the training, crisis response training or crisis intervention training or whatever?
Yeah, so all of our officers receive a crisis, what is called crisis intervention training. And basically it trains law enforcement officers to become more adept at dealing with individuals in crisis, to de-escalate potentially violent situations, and to ensure the safety and diversion of individuals in crisis to a treatment center. So that we go through that training. And also on a lot of these crisis calls, we utilize what's called the SMART card, which stands for San Mateo County Mental Health Assessment and Referral Team. And this team is available for first responders with immediate field assistance if needed. And the team that consists of mental health professionals that will go out to calls with. They just went out to a call with us a couple of days ago to somebody in crisis, and they did an excellent job, both our officers and the SMART team. And then again with homeless, we work with primarily 3 outreach groups: Life Moves, Star Vista, and Telecare. And we work with them often. They come and meet us. We refer people to them. They ask us to go out with them at times. And we just use Telecare to get somebody services that he's needed for years. But I think we have a really good relationship with those groups. And I certainly would support, giving them, more funds if needed.
We do contribute to the HOT team, right? Financially.
Yeah.
Life Moves, right?
And we do contribute to Star Vista as well.
That's right. Right.
So
Great.
our next question is going to be a live question or comment, and it's from Kathy. So I'm going to unmute you. You can go ahead and.
It might be our former mayor, Kathy Baylock.
Kathy, can you unmute yourself? I will.
Unmute.
There you are.
Here I am. So, yeah, I just want to start off by giving my full support to Chief Matucci and the Burlingame PD. We have a fine department, and I just wanted to make a comment from having observed our police for 20 years, and one particular case I'm familiar with from 10 years ago, where the police were called. It was a mental health issue. The son was threatening his mother with a butcher's knife. And the two officers responding to the call, the first one went down a dark alley towards where the apartment was. And the young man was coming at him with the knife. And so the officer tried the taser, it failed. And then the officer tripped and fell. And then the man was coming at him with the butcher's knife. Second officer arrived and used force. And unfortunately, he died. But I just am very wary of using non-armed people in mental health distress calls through 911. I just, having witnessed that and been a part of that, I feel that we have a very good balance of community policing. Our police are very visible. And I personally think an armed police officer gives me a lot of confidence, and I feel safer in my community knowing that the officers are armed. So that's a different perspective. So I just wanted to share that thought with people who, like Chief Matucci said, think that routine calls are routine calls. And I support that point of view. And God bless the BPD. That's all I can say. Thanks.
Thanks, Mayor Baylock.
Okay, our next question, I'll go back to the emails. Give us a statistical idea of the amount of crime, violent, and property in the city versus the number of welfare checks of the elderly, medical calls, and homeless, and connecting those individuals to services. Does the department feel fully trained on the welfare checks of elderly, medical calls, and homeless individuals?
I think that the timing on this question is actually pretty good. It's great. I think off the top of my head, I would say that we deal with probably 40% calls related to crime and 60% calls related to non-crime. But that's not just including what the question was. It also includes noise complaints and neighbor disputes. So I'm talking 40% crime and 60% all non-crime. And I'm very comfortable with the training, with our training and the handling of these calls. As I mentioned, just, we've all been trained in the crisis intervention training that I talked about just on the last question. All of our officers are trained in first aid and CPR every 2 years. We work with, again, with the SMART team. We work with the homeless outreach. Well, I answered the question with the one before, but we work with homeless outreach groups such as Life Move, Star Vista, and Telecare to provide assistance to those struggling with homelessness. We're all CIT trained. We work with the SMART team. So I'm very comfortable with our training in those areas and how we work with those outreach teams.
Okay, our next question is from a Zoom comment. It said, what is your policy regarding the use of tasers? I'm thinking of the deaths of 3 men of color in San Mateo County in recent years. I believe that tasers are to be used only at a distance, but have actually been used very close and repeatedly, causing serious or deadly harm.
So, the policy in regards to taser is it's a less than lethal form of force, and again, it's used if reasonable. It can be used at a distance by shooting the prongs, or it can be used close up. We have several safety factors in place. We have our policy restricts multiple uses of the taser. I know I've seen video of officers, tasing somebody 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, which is against our policy. We'll use the taser one time on somebody to try to get compliance and allow a second, but after that, it's out of policy to tase anybody more than that. At that point, you need to move on to a different type of force because clearly the taser isn't working. And again, it's just, you can use the taser for a variety of reasons, but it's it's above empty hand combat and below deadly force. But I think it's a valuable tool. I think it's saved more lives. It saved, I think, in my opinion, it saved so many lives and so many injuries to people that, I think it's a invaluable tool.
Chief, you looked at our use of tasers in the past some number of years, and it was a surprising number. Do you remember what that was?
Well, I just updated those stats. So I just looked at the last 5 years of use of force incidents. We've only used our tasers twice in the last 5 years.
So it's just not a thing that we do very often.
No.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Okay, our next question is an email. Our police department policies are those provided by Lexipol, which, as I understand, are designed not so much as to serve the public, but as to protect the police from lawsuits and other repercussions. I do not know the actual mechanics of how the Lexipol arrangement works, whether it is a one-time purchase of legal documents to cut and paste, or as I suspect, a subscription made with ongoing support and payments. Are you going to get someone from the ACLU or a civil rights attorney to provide a more rounded and perhaps more honest perspective? After all, a private company selling policy that affects the public is as scary as private prisons and black box sentencing and probation AIs are.
Okay, so I would like to read actually from Lexipol on exactly what they provide, so I don't miss anything. But they provide constitutionally sound policies to thousands of law enforcement agencies across the nation based on the latest statutory and case law and progressive best practices with tools that allow agencies to customize their policies to the unique needs of their community. We are regularly provided with ongoing updates to help keep our policies current and in compliance with ever-evolving legislation. Lexipol is sensitive to and frequently encourages input from a variety of sources, including members of the public and reform groups, and develop policy and training based on the most current legal standards and best practices. The primary mission of the Burlingame Police Department and Lexipol is policy, guidance, and training has always been the preservation of life. So with that being said, it is an ongoing subscription, and they provide updates almost quarterly. And it's an invaluable resource to us because there's no way that we could, at the police department, keep up with all the changes in legislation and case law and best practices. We'd have to hire a full-time, law enforcement attorney to do that. So it's really an invaluable service. They provide a template for us, but we can certainly change, any policies that we need to, if need be. And we just did that last month after the George Floyd incident. We banned the carotid hold, and we added language in our use of force policy about de-escalation. So, and also, our policies aren't a secret. They're posted on our website for anybody to see. So if there's, people go through there and there's concerns, I would welcome anybody to call me and talk to me about it. And I know Lexipol works with the ACLU, and I know firsthand that I have worked with the ACLU on 2 different occasions on our policies, on our taser policy and on our immigration enforcement policy, where I've met with the ACLU and taken their suggestions and actually took some of their suggestions in our policy. So again, there's no secret with our policies. They're there for anybody to read, and we have worked with the ACLU. And I think Lexipol is a great company. And again, they provide an invaluable service that we could not do ourselves.
If I could just add to that a little bit, in the city attorney's office, we also obviously track the same law that Lexipol does. And so when a significant case comes down, we call chief and we check in on it and figure out its implications for us. And like as not, my experience has been that Lexipol has been on it in terms of anticipating those moves and making sure that there's sort of a easy to operationalize policy, because part of the problem is translating things that happen in the legal world into live incidents in the field where people have to think quickly and know how to act. Lexipol is pretty good at doing that. But having said that, as the chief says, we're involved in reviewing those policies, and we've made changes to some of them. We can do so in the future where it's appropriate. Sometimes, the one size does not fit all, and we do look carefully at those things on an iterative basis. We never go dark on those questions. The other issue is that I think it's on that question of liability avoidance. generally what you're trying to do with that is keep people safer. The way you avoid liability is by not injuring people. So if there's policies designed to not injure people, then that's probably a good thing. And that's one of those things where that interest actually aligns with public safety pretty well. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to try to have policies where you avoid the largest number of injuries possible.
Okay.
Before you go to the next one, Megan, I just want to remind folks, if you're new to the Zoom, since last time I mentioned this, that all of our council members are on. You just can't see them, but you will at the end. Next question, Megan. I think maybe the Hinkles.
Yep, we're gonna try the Hinkles. Okay, you can unmute yourself.
So Anne or David, there you go.
Hello?
It looks like you're unmuted. If you can try talking.
Okay.
We can barely hear you. Maybe turn your volume up.
Hear me now?
Yes, sort of.
First of all, I just really appreciate all of you. And I want to say thank you. I think everybody who works for and with Burlingame is fantastic. And I have personal experience of all of you. So, did you hear that?
We did, yes. Thank you so much, Anne.
So, my question is for Chief Matucci. I'm a psychotherapist, and that idea of 5150. If a client is in danger to self or others, the idea is to call the 911 and do a 5150, right?
Yes.
Okay. How prepared is that appropriate? Or is that something that should be handled in another way?
So did you hear that, Chief?
It's whether or not if somebody needs to be is dealing with it was in crisis, whether you want to call the police department or handle a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think every situation is different. I think if the family or friend can reasonably take the person to call their therapist or take them to hospital to get them treatment or services, I think that's great. But oftentimes we get called only because the person has either become violent or the family or friend just can't just can't deal with the situation because the person could get violent. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to handle it, but for the most part, I believe that the police are called when there's, a fear of violence or a fear of suicide, where the person who's calling, doesn't feel as they want to have to act in that situation. That person may be barricaded and the caller, can't get into the house. So they're going to call the police department to see if they can, access the person's, residence. There's a lot of factors to consider. And again, there's times when I think it can be handled without police, but I think there's times that police are needed. And even when, the smart car or crisis, professionals are called to scenes like that, a lot of times they will call the police to support them because of a fear of violence.
I also want to add that that's one of those instances where a big part of the heavy lifting is done by our dispatchers, because they're gathering information about what really is the situation, what can the responders anticipate when they get there, are there weapons involved, what's the situation, what are people afraid of? And that's, if you look at some of these incidences where mental health calls went badly, it was often because there wasn't good information being given to the officers who were responding. So they walked into a situation they were unprepared for and didn't understand the nature of the problem. For example, that someone wasn't a threat, that it was a call out of concern, but not because they were worried that somebody was going to actually be harmful or so on. And so that's information that our dispatchers work hard to get good, accurate, as much as possible in a crisis, information, so that when people are responding, they know what they're walking into and can use the most de-escalated way of dealing with it that's possible under the circumstances.
Our next question is an email. It says, I'm very thankful that our city and police force are taking such a proactive and open stance regarding use of force and the role of police in our community. One thing I have heard and read extensively is how negotiated union contracts make it very difficult to ensure oversight and accountability. Do you propose creating a civilian oversight board and negotiating with the union so officers found in violation of city policies can be held accountable and will not simply be rehired in other jurisdictions?
I think there's a lot in that question. The chief talked about the federal legislation that's wending its way through Congress, and we'll see if it makes it through to create a national registry for so that bad cops don't get hired elsewhere. In terms of, we do hold our folks accountable. The chief talked about how often they're evaluated and how often their actions are reviewed. And we have a whole process laid out in our memorandum of understanding with our various police units. We have police officers unit, we have a sergeant's unit, and we have, I think it's called police administrators. So in all of those, there are rules about what you need to do and what you can't do. And if there is discipline to be handed out, it's talks through how we do that. And we do hand out discipline, not a ton because our officers aren't misbehaving. But if something does happen, we do have that mechanism in our various memorandums of understanding that allows us to go through a process and discipline as needed. There is state legislation called the Peace Officers Bill of Rights. We call it POBAR because we like acronyms in the world of government. And POBAR actually really prescribes what we can and can't do. And the police officers themselves and the sergeants and the lieutenants, et cetera, they have a lot of rights protected under POBAR that make it something that we can't necessarily take certain actions because we'd be in violation of POBAR. And in terms of a civilian oversight board, I think that's kind of a different matter. That's not really about, disciplining cops because we already have that ability and that mechanism. If people are in violation of the MOU, if they violate our rules and regs and, do something boneheaded, we will take action and we will discipline, and we have. A civilian oversight board, I think there's maybe a place for that in a really large organization in a big city like a San Francisco, like in Oakland, where they have hundreds and hundreds of officers. I can see something like that being potentially useful, although they get very politicized very quickly. In a small organization like Burlingame, where we have 40 sworn officers, we know what's going on. The council knows what's going on. We just have a much better ability to monitor everything that's happening here. That being said, it's a policy call for the council. So if that's something that they want to explore in the future, they can certainly direct us to do the research necessary, but I don't know that it will get to the outcome that is at the heart of the question. And I don't know if Chief or Kathleen, you want to add anything on that? You probably know a lot more than I do about POBAR, Chief. So if you want to explain that any better.
I just want to add just a really quick comment is that it's really not the negotiated union contracts that tie our hands as much as it is POBAR and just civil service rules, not just for police officers, but in general, civil service rules. It makes it at times very difficult to discipline and terminate any city or state employee. So it's not necessarily the negotiated union contracts. It's kind of out of our hands because it's actually state law. And City Attorney might want to add to that.
Yeah, just to concur with that. I mean, there are a lot of like the qualified immunity question. That's not something that's up to the city. That's something that's a function of federal and state case law. The state law on POBAR sets the playing field, and that is what it is, and we have to operate it within it. I have to say, one of the things that's different between departments is kind of what is the relationship with the unions, and is it something that is inherently hostile and everything is a fight, or is it something where people cooperate pretty well? And having worked in a number of jurisdictions, just from my personal experience, we have a much healthier relationship with our unions here than in some cities. And I think that's important. That goes to that question of culture of, is everybody pulling in the same direction? And that's not to say that everybody agrees on everything all the time, but it's at least a constructive dialogue, and it's, everyone's trying to do the right thing. And I think that that's an important thing to keep going.
I'd also like to add also that, you know, when we do our discipline, it's not kept at the police department. It's not some secret thing that it's at the police department. Anybody who's being investigated is run through city manager, city attorney, and HR. I make them aware of everything. So that's kind of a little oversight board in itself. You know, so for people who think that, you know, we just hide everything here at the police department and handle and, you know, discipline our own, absolutely not. Any complaint, any investigation, I've sent on to city manager, city attorney, and HR for further input and review.
All right, our next question comes in via Zoom chat. Do gun owners in Burlingame register their guns with the Burlingame Police Department?
No, they register those through the state. Although we have access, we can run, you know, a person out and find out if they have guns registered to them. But it's registered through the state, not through the city.
Okay.
And we don't, just to amend that, we don't run people randomly. We would only do that if we had to respond to a place and needed to know if there were guns there, that kind of thing.
You have access to the information, yes, but we don't use it.
All right, our next question is an email regarding policy 302.1, duty to intercede. How many times in the last couple of years have any officers interceded to prevent the use of unreasonable force? Example, are there any reports of these observations to supervisors that can be made public?
So we haven't had any reports from officers about excessive force. I think because I would say because we haven't had excessive force, and I would just like to back it up with the fact that we haven't had any reports of excessive force by the public in well over 7 years. So yeah, and we all have body worn cameras, and so any use of force incident is absolutely, you know, is reviewed, and the body worn camera footage is looked at. So if this was happening where there was some excessive force that wasn't being reported by the public or by their officers, we would find out about it with our body worn cameras and we would deal with it accordingly.
Okay, I think we have a live question. It's from Anya. So I'm going to allow you to talk, and now you just have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi, this is actually Anya's computer. I'm her dad. This is a question about to the chief and the city attorney. What are the Burlingame? What are your views on the so-called warrior training that goes on with outside consultants in many police departments around the country?
I'm sorry, the which training? Warrior?
Warrior training, yes.
Huh, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I'm unaware of that type of training, but just based on the name and the title, I don't think I will want my officers going to it for sure.
Okay, good. So that actually explains your position on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is an email again. How will City Council and the Burlingame Police Department ensure that the community outreach program reaches and includes new voices, specifically people of color and low-income residents of Burlingame? These communities need to feel safe and like they are not being targeted in any way by the police. In this situation, the voice of these communities is the most important voice you can hear from. The normal tactics used for engaging the community might not work. New strategies must be developed to make this town hall be more than an empty gesture.
100% agree. So I think, you know, as a first step, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be working with Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center to see what kinds of tidbits they can give us. We are certainly open to suggestions. So I encourage anybody who, you know, has thoughts of how we can further reach into the communities to let us know. We have really good relationships with the Burlingame School District and with the San Mateo Union High School District, and they do serve, you know, everybody with kids in Burlingame. And so, you know, I think we can rely on those networks as well to help us. But we're all learning here, and we're all doing our best. So if you do have thoughts for us, you know, I encourage you, excuse me, you can email me directly at lgoldman, Goldman, @burlingame.org. Or we have info, INFO, @burlingame.org, and that will also get to me. It's a little easier to remember. And, let us know what your thoughts are, and we'd be happy to, try to figure that out. We do have a nice team of folks who are working on this. Niall Blackburn in my office helped us put this this evening together, and she's got some thoughts. Our Parks and Recreation Director has some thoughts on how to work on it, Margaret Glomstad. And so, we are doing our best to reach out as we can. The council also has their feelers out. So, we will do our best, but we welcome any input, constructive or otherwise, on how to better reach folks.
Okay, the next
Oh, sorry, just to add to that, we also do have some contacts in the faith community that do slice across different demographics. And so we'll be reaching out through those. And obviously we're trying to get various messages out in different languages and so on. So this has already been a multi-front effort, but we are eager, not just for this issue, but for all of them, because we want everybody involved in city, their city government. So it's good to develop those channels.
Right.
Okay. We have a Zoom chat comment / kind of question. How many citizens and council members have actually gone on a ride along? They're free and very eye-opening to the risks the officers face from call to call. I'm assuming we're not doing ride-alongs at the moment.
We're not doing ride-alongs at the moment. Yeah, I think we get maybe a few ride-alongs a month, and I'm not sure if all the council have been on ride-alongs. I think most of them have, if not all of them, but they can comment on that when they.
You want to just explain what a ride-along is in case some folks don't?
It's a ride-along. Yeah, you would just call the police department and say you're interested in a ride-along, and then our operations division lieutenant would get a hold of you and come up with the time, and you would just come in and basically ride along with the officer for anywhere from 2 to 6 hours and just see what they do during their shift on a daily basis, of how we interact with the public and the types of calls that that we receive and that we go on and how we handle them. I think it's actually, I agree with the question or the comment. It's actually very eye-opening and very beneficial.
So someday, hopefully we can do them again.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one's an email question. It says, if the city allocated 10% more funding to Burlingame Police Department today, how would you utilize the funds?
That's a great question. So I think, so if you're talking about 10%, we have 40 officers, so 10% would give us, 4 more officers, and I definitely would utilize that 10% with personnel. As far as the personnel I would add, I think I would add 1 officer to our community response team, or CRT team. And for those of you who don't know what the community response team is, it was created about 5 years ago. And it's Burlingame's version of a street team, but it's not really a street team. It's they deal with quality of life issues. They deal with our homeless outreach. They do targeted policing when we do have a problem in a certain area of town. But most importantly, they do our community outreach. And so they do National Night Out. They do the station tours. They do neighborhood presentations, as the city manager mentioned earlier. Even though we don't have neighborhood watch programs at this point in time, neighborhoods do get together and ask our officers to come out and give a presentation or visit them on a block party. And so our CRT team goes out to those. They do presentation to youth groups. We do station tours for Cub Scout groups and Girl Scout groups. And again, they go to block parties if asked. So it's been a tremendously successful program and a team. And so if I was to have 4 more officers, I would think I would add a 3rd officer to that team. I think I'd also add another traffic officer. As everybody knows, traffic is always an issue in Burlingame. It was 29 years ago when I started, and it's probably the only constant that I've seen in my 29-year career. It was there 29 years ago, and it's here again. So I think I would add another motor officer to assist with, the amount of traffic complaints we have. If you asked me this question 4 months ago, I would say I would add a 2nd SRO, school resource officer, just because I think we work really well with the schools, and calls for service at the schools have been increasing over time. And we're looking at adding another high school to Burlingame. Peninsula High School is looking at going into Burlingame. So my thought would be to add a 2nd school resource officer. But now with COVID-19 and maybe kids not going back to school full time, I'm not sure if we would need that. Also, in light of the George Floyd incident, I know some schools are hesitant with having officers there. So that may play a factor into not, but I would would consider adding a second school resource officer. And then the fourth position would probably not be an officer. Probably I would add a dispatcher. We have 7 dispatchers right now. I would probably add an 8th. You know, it's because there's times where, and it's infrequent, but there's times when there's only one dispatcher up in dispatch center at a time, and they're amazing at what they do. I don't know, I've never met anybody who can answer 4 phone calls and talk to 4 officers on the air at the same time, one person. They're amazing, but I think I would add a 4th dispatchers to make sure we double up and give the community the best, you know, the best response we can. So that's what I would do with 10% more funds. And I'm sure, you know, other people would have other opinions, and I would certainly ask for other opinions, but that would be what I would do.
You kind of have a follow-up to that one, something you touched on. What are your policies surrounding police and schools, and are you reconsidering these policies following the increased focus on police brutality?
And again, you know, the schools use us. You know, we go to the schools because they want us there. We're not forcing ourselves on the school. It's a service we provide to them. They pay nothing. It comes out of our, you know, our budget. We provide the officers to them based on them asking us. If they, you know, if they feel as though they don't want the officers, you know, I understand that. I understand where they're coming from. I respect their opinion, and we would, you know, certainly have a discussion. And if need be, we would pull the officers. But I think we have a tremendously good relationship with the schools, with the students, and you know, in my opinion, I don't think it's a good idea. But if that's a discussion we have to have, it's a discussion we have to have.
Our next question is an email. Assuming Burlingame Police Department recognizes the rationale for redistributing police funding for non-criminal incidents, thus enabling other agency and trained personnel to respond to incidents, how will funding reallocation be addressed in Burlingame? For example, social workers, child protective services, and mental health workers.
So none of those are actually city functions. So, you know, we would be, if the council and the community made a decision to reallocate funding, we would have to work with outside agencies to figure out where that funding would go. Right now, we're not reallocating funding. We are not increasing funding for the police department, you know, except for the very minor cost of living type increases. But this budget year was basically a rollover for most of our departments, in part because our financial situation is so uncertain with the COVID pandemic. So we didn't grow a lot and we didn't cut a lot. We're in a bit of a wait and see, and we'll come back in the fall and look at the budget again once we have a little bit more information about how our economy is doing. But again, you know, social services, homeless outreach, all of that, those are traditionally not city functions, except in the very larger cities. They are social services, social welfare type programs are handled at the county level and by nonprofit agencies in this county.
Okay. If an officer has been reported as using unreasonable force, what action was taken?
So if that happened, an internal investigation would take place and proper discipline would be imposed. And, you know, that investigation would obviously, as I mentioned many times, would involve, you know, review of the body-worn camera footage. If the complaint involved death or great bodily injury, the DA's office would also be involved in the investigation. But again, we would investigate it and take the appropriate action and appropriate discipline.
Great. So why don't we go, let's do 2 more questions, Megan, and then I want to make sure we have time for the city council to give their wrap up. And then whatever we didn't get to, again, we'll do our best to answer those questions and put them into a document that we put up on our website and get out via social media and other methods.
Okay. I'm skipping around a little bit. Please confirm our understanding that Burlingame citizens vote for city council members who in turn appoint the police chief, and for sheriff and district attorney, these candidates are directly on the ballot.
So not quite. Burlingame citizens do vote for the city council, and then the city council appoints the city manager, that's me, and they appoint the city attorney, and that's my friend Kathleen. And then everybody else, with just a couple of exceptions, is appointed by me. So I am Chief Matucci's boss. I had the honor and the privilege of promoting him a year and a half ago now. I also appointed his predecessor, and the person before that was here when I got here. So that function is under the auspices of the city manager, and so I'm very happy to be able to do that. The other offices, I can't remember, what was it, sheriff and DA, those are elected positions in the county, and so the full county votes on those offices when they come up. So DA Wagstaff and Sheriff Bolanos are both elected officials, and you as residents of San Mateo County get to vote for them or not vote for them as your will is.
Don't forget to register to vote, please.
Yes, register to vote. Megan is doing a big push to get folks to register, and she's actually doing a countdown on her windows in her office. So you can see how many days you have left to register.
88 more days to register if you want to vote in the November election. All right, another question regarding policy 300.7, supervisor responsibility. Are critical incidents civil liability incident reports made public? If not, can you give a summary of any reports, please?
So I would think the city attorney might want to talk about whether they're made public, and then I can give you some stats after that, actually.
Sure. So as a general matter, no. If they fit under any of the disclosure categories under state law, then of course they would be made public. And our city actually has a track record of being first out of the gate to disclose when there's something that should be disclosed, even when that, means that we're lonely in that regard. So we are quick to disclose when we have to. Most of these things are actually for internal review. They're attorney-client privileged. We're looking at seeing whether there's any problem there. If they then turn into something else, if there's a criminal charge to be filed, if that is against an officer, if there's a internal investigation, they then enter other categories. But it's a first screen looking for those things. And so they're not, as a matter of default, available to the public just because they're an internal working document, and we need to be able to be honest in them for our internal review.
But I did run some stats, did some stats in regards to the use of force, and I wanted to share that I think is interesting. I went back about 5 years. So in 2016, Burlingame Police, we made 548 arrests, and out of those 548 arrests, we used force only 5 times. One was empty hand control, which is basically hand to hand without any weapons. 3 were displaying a firearm only, and 1 was a taser deployment. In 2017, we made 569 arrests, and we had 8 use of force incidents, and all 8 of them were simply empty hand control, no weapons involved. In 2018, we made 604 arrests, and we had 14 use of force. And 9 of those were empty hand control, 4 were displaying a firearm, and 1 was a taser deployment. In 2019, we had 627 arrests, and we had 8 use of forces. 7 were empty hand control, and 1 was displaying a firearm. And so far in 2020, we've made 295 arrests. We've had 8 use of force incidents, 4 were empty hand control, and 4 were displaying a firearm. Of all the use of force incidents that I've listed above, or that I've listed, no hospitalizations occurred to any of the suspects, although officers were injured in a few of them. So I just wanted to share those stats for for people to know.
Great. Well, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Kathleen. Megan, you did a great job reading all those questions. That was not easy. If you could bring the council back in as panelists, I will turn the meeting back over to Mayor Beach. So give us just 1 sec, folks, to bring the council back in. And we have Councilmember Colson. I was supposed to text you to tell you to come back. Sorry.
Perfect. That's okay. I took care of everything, so I'm good.
We have 2 meetings going tonight.
Great. I know I have a few things going tonight, but we got it done. So thank you all very much for this meeting, for Mayor Beach putting it on the agenda, and for colleagues supporting the Obama pledge. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate that everyone signed on to that. And Chief Matucci, as always, you and your team doing great work, and also to our city staff, who really have delved deeply into the questions that our public has, and I thought came up with some very good responses and answers today to help people understand just exactly how the Burlingame Police Department works. I just point out that when I first came to Burlingame, there were almost 52 police officers. And when I started on the council, we were down to 36, and we've now moved to 40 sworn. So we are already significantly under the peak that we had in the past. And I appreciate how hard the chief and the team work to cover what's a growing city, much larger and much more diverse and growing city with a smaller staff already. And I also appreciate that when we're working on the budget with Carol, that a big portion of the police budget is sort of beyond our control because it goes to benefits and pensions that are already set in stone and were developed years ago, and that we have to pay a part of. And so we have a much smaller discretionary amount of money to work with. The other thing I really appreciate is that our city in 2017 passed Measure I in order to add one more CERT officer, which we did. And last year when I was the mayor, I will say that most of the emails that I received were for traffic, police assistance for traffic, speeding, safety, quality of life crimes, hate crimes. As you know, we had a very big one last year that the police stepped in and solved at the high school. And I think what I saw was actually a number of people asking for police assistance, and our police just always going in and providing what they could to the city. So I just thank the public for joining today. I thought the questions were excellent. I thought they were thoughtful, and I appreciate being included in this. And I look forward to this being a first step around the transparency and the good work and the improvements that we can make as a city council with our police force. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson, for your remarks. We appreciate that. I'd like to ask Councilmember Brownrigg to go next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks to our city team for putting tonight together. When I joined council 10 years ago, we were in the midst of another budget crisis, and I am proud that I fought with Kathy Baylock and Ann O'Brien to make sure we kept our police local and we didn't outsource our police department. And I think for anybody listening tonight and listening to Chief Matucci, you can understand exactly why that is such an important aspect for the city of Burlingame, to be able to exercise that kind of quality control. And Chief, I want to really thank you for doing that job that you described tonight of making sure that our men and women are both trained, but also responsive to the quality that we expect in Burlingame, and to understand their role to both protect, but also to serve. I got a lot of heat a couple weeks ago for some of my comments. I spoke from the heart because I look across our country and I am deeply disturbed, not just by one incident or two, but by multiple incidents of the state taking the lives of innocent, unarmed people. And ultimately, I worry deeply about that as a country and as a nation, because if our people lose faith in the state and the police are part of the state, then they lose confidence in everything. And that is deeply troubling to me. So I want to be clear. My comments, obviously, last 2 weeks ago, I was not clear enough that I don't see a problem in Burlingame. But because we don't have a problem here, doesn't mean we can't be part of the solution. Doesn't mean we can't do better. Doesn't mean we can't lead by example. And that's what I'm urging us to think through. And I so appreciate the chief for being willing to think about that, and our police union too. So I wanted to make it clear, I don't see a problem here in Burlingame. In fact, I think tonight you heard over and over again why we're doing a great job. It doesn't mean we can't be better, and it doesn't mean we can't think differently. I want to share just briefly, I won't go over the details, but there are a couple of cases just recently where our men and women were under threat of violence and did not use violence in response and restrained the suspect, even at risk to themselves, without pulling a gun, without hurting the suspect. And that's what we want to see. To answer one of the public's questions, SB 1421 actually requires all departments to release records of use of force and other malfeasance by police officers if requested. That, I think, is a good step in the direction of transparency. So for me, I look forward to the conversation over the next year. I don't intend to back off from asking about how we can do things better. And I'll leave you with this thought, which is I serve on our fire board. 30 years ago, our firefighters, men and women, were realizing that the role that they traditionally played of fighting fires was beginning to diminish because buildings were becoming safer and safer. And so they could have dwindled in number to fight the fewer and fewer fires. We could have gone that direction. But instead, what they said is, what other things can we do that are life-saving, life-preserving? And that's when fire evolved into becoming also a first responder for healthcare and so much of what they do today, to be EMTs, to be that first response in healthcare. And I think, frankly, on a nationwide basis, that's what our police forces need to think about. How do we evolve into serving these things, not outsourcing those services? How do we bring some of that training in-house? And I look forward to seeing if we can do that here so that our men and women can provide those services at the same time as they're doing the routine work. But in particular, I want to thank Chief Matucci and the team in Burlingame Police for the work they do every day. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. I want to give Councilmember Ricardo Ortiz an opportunity to make some closing remarks next. Ricardo, I think you're going to have to unmute yourself. We can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself?
I think his it's Ricardo, it's on your computer because he is unmuted, but we still can't hear him.
You want to try one more time? Okay.
If not, I'll just say Councilmember Ortiz is very thankful for this discussion tonight.
I see a thumbs up. We'll let the Vice Mayor speak next, and we'll give you one more try in a moment. All right, Vice Mayor O'Brien, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Beach. I would just actually like to thank Chief Matucci for taking time this evening to really listen and answer the questions from our community members. And in addition, I'd like to thank our city manager and our city attorney. You know, in my mind, the Burlingame Police's primary role is really to protect, and then if necessary, enforce. And I've been very fortunate to be able to grow up in Burlingame and really see the development of the police department. And I really see them as a department that promotes the community. And I'm quite appreciative and grateful for all the positive work that they've done here in Burlingame. You know, it's important to remember that in all professions, there's always areas for improvement. And I appreciate the fact, you know, this evening there were a couple, you know, policy issues that have already been changed, and it's always evolving. And I appreciate the fact that Chief Matucci and the police department are transparent, and that's how we learn, and that's how we educate the community, and we welcome those questions. And I'm sure we will be working on improvements futuristically. It's just really important that we don't forget the good things that they do. Whether it's interactions that we see on Burlingame Avenue or Broadway or downtown areas, whether it's our schools that have requested resource officers to help integrate, you know, with our students and develop trusting relationships, whether it's, you know, helping the homeless. I know I have sent a couple emails and phone calls to the police department when I've been, you know, become aware of people who do need help in our city, and they're right on it, and they collaborate quite closely with the county. Whether it's a National Night Out, or the Burlingame Neighborhood Network, or the Pet Parade. Also, I've actually been fortunate to do a couple ride-alongs. It's been a few years, but when I first started on the city council, I really wanted to start understanding what all our departments did. And so I had that opportunity a couple times, and it's fascinating. And it really is an eye-opener to what they do in Burlingame. I don't think we really realize all the different duties that they perform. So they do have a difficult job in difficult circumstances. And we're really quite lucky to have them, and to really, they do a really good job keeping our city safe. So I really look forward to working with them in the future. We've done some really good things in Burlingame, and even especially just in the last couple of years, whether it's the extra community resource officers that we have per the community request, and also implementing the body cameras. That to me was a big improvement. So again, thank you to our chief, and I really look forward to working with the police department and with our community with future meetings in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Let's go back to Councilmember Ortiz just to see if your mute button is working better now.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right.
I think I figured it out. I think we have to just change the device I was using. So I appreciate it. I just want to thank everybody who showed up tonight to share their thoughts. I think it's very important that as we go through this process, that we continue communicating with the community and that we get some new ideas. I want to thank the staff, and particularly Chief Matucci, for your time and your transparency and your willingness to share all this with the public. We were all horrified by what we saw out of Minneapolis and the death of George Floyd. And I think rightfully so, we are asking a lot of questions of our police departments, making sure that we don't ever find ourselves in a situation like that. And I think it makes sense, but it's a tough time to be a police officer when everybody's scrutinizing everything you do. My hat goes off to your troop, Chief, but it's important that we go through the process. And I think there's a lot of good questions we're asked today, and we need to continue to explore them. But having said that, I just want to make sure that we find the solution that is a Burlingame solution. What makes sense here is not what makes sense in Minneapolis or in Berkeley or San Carlos or Hillsborough. We need to find what's right for Burlingame. We have a very special mix of commercial and residential, a very special mix with our hotels and our location where we are. And I think we need to find something that's specific to us. I think that when we come out of this process, we need to always remember that we are different. So look forward to where this is going and look forward to being a part of it. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And again, thank you to staff.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. Appreciate that. And I echo colleagues' thanks to staff, particularly Chief of Police tonight. I think it was a terrific conversation, and I think it really created an opportunity for understanding. And it's clear, I think, that our whole department and our chief really wants to be responsive to the community, and that was certainly evident tonight. Never been more proud to hear such great, thoughtful questions from the community and thought-provoking questions. So we appreciate your engagement, your involvement tonight. It occurred to me as we were having some of the questions came up, and Chief and City Manager Goldman were talking about our tight-knit police department. It's really reflective of our tight-knit neighborhoods. It's the same thing as, we mentioned we've got 40 officers here. It makes me feel so lucky we're here in Burlingame. When I think of our neighbors to our south in San Mateo, they're a much bigger city. They've got, I think, 117 sworn officers. Our neighbors to our north contract with the Sheriff's Department to have their police services. Same with San Carlos. So Millbrae and San Carlos have, 800 sheriff officers, that are part of their department. We are a very small, tight-knit department, and that gives us a real opportunity to do some thoughtful community policing. There was a great question about how are we going to outreach to communities of color, and we need to do some further thought on that. I know many of us have had the opportunities to sit and have some listening sessions and conversations, really important ones, with people of color in our community. And I hope in this process we'll do more of that and maybe do some targeted outreach listening sessions with our police department. And I think that's something we're going to take to heart to make sure we're reaching a diverse cross-section of our community. I appreciate Chief's sharing some use of force statistics. I think it comforted me to hear those statistics, to know that we use of force with a lot of restraint. But, you know, as a nation, we're all concerned because we know what we have learned through this whole national conversation we're having is that use of force policies disproportionately impact people of color more than white people. Which leads me to just sort of my final thought is this is such an important conversation to have in the context of the police department, but there's also a bigger conversation that's happening throughout the country and needs to happen in Burlingame, and we're having it. It's about systemic racism that is happening everywhere. And that's an issue that those of us who are not people of color need to own. It's our issue. It's not people of color's issue. So we are going to continue to have some of those big conversations that expand beyond policing, that talk about it with our schools and with our community. Mayor Colson started an effort last year called Burlingame United, Stands United Against Hate. It was a week-long event with lots of education opportunities, community gatherings through our library. We're going to do more of that this year, and it's going to be even bigger. And we're hoping that you will be involved who are participating in this conversation tonight, because clearly you value these things as well. So thank you all for being a part of this. Extra special thanks to our very talented staff and our caring staff. We are so proud of you tonight, and we appreciate your candor, and we appreciate the community's time to be with us tonight, to listen and learn and seek additional understanding. So this is the first of many conversations. With that, Madam City Manager, is there anything else you'd like to say in closing?
I just appreciate everyone participating tonight. I think we got some great questions, and Megan has figured out how to do a fancy survey. So if everyone could just hang on for one more minute while she puts that up, it would really help us as we move forward.
I think it just goes up automatically. I don't know if I figured it out, but I think it's going to go up automatically at the end of this meeting.
Okay.
And so it's not in the chat. It just will pop up in our Zoom. Is that what we're saying?
That's
okay.
So
we haven't
had that before. It'll pop up.
If it doesn't,
if not, we'll put it on our website.
Yes.
And so people who have watched the recording can also participate in the survey later. So again, thank you all for being with us. Please stay healthy, safe. Please wear a face covering, keep social distancing. Let's keep San Mateo County off that watch list. Everybody needs to do their part to keep our community safe. Thank you so much, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.